breaking my arm when I was about 5th grade, so.
Yeah, I wasn't as scared of horses back then as I was now. Like just seeing how big, massive, muscly animal roaring its way by. I was walking around camping at night, and there was the campgrounds also had a horse place nearby, so they would always like roam around there. And I was walking around at night, and I turned on my flashlight, and one was just standing right there looking at me. It's really.
Yeah, they're bigger than we are.
Yeah. But alright, I'll start it out. Hello, I'm Reed McWilliams, and I'm here today to conduct an interview for the National Railroad Memorial and the City of Durand. The date is the date is not that date. The date is August 12th, 2014, and with me today is Gerald Chapman. First, I want to thank you for agreeing to this interview. The information that you provide will help us preserve the history of the railroad industry in Michigan, specifically in Durand. The content of this interview will focus on your past experiences working with the railroad industry. The final product of the oral history conducted will be used by the National Railroad Memorial to tell the stories of those who have worked in the railroad industry. To begin, please give your full name, your age, and your date of birth.
Gerald Chapman. I'm 61 and born October 21st, 1952.
Can you tell me where you were born?
Here in Durand. Durand Hospital.
How many people did you live with in Durand?
I had a family of 7. I was the oldest.
Large family.
Lived outside of town about 4 miles. So I lived here my whole life.
Did you live with anyone else beside your immediate family? What did your community look like before all of this, back when you were young?
It was a lot busier.
It was?
It's the same. They've tore out tracks, and it's really smaller than it used to be. It's changed quite a little.
Big change. Can you remember some of your friends and neighbors?
Oh, I grew up outside of town. First a couple miles, and moved a couple miles farther, but I was near a horse farm, one of the biggest standardbred farms in Michigan, which they've dwindled down to, it's not there anymore, but they used to have 150 mares on their farm in breeding season. It was a big farm. I've always been on the farming end of it, so.
Do you know what they have there now?
Well, they still race a few horses out of there, but that farm is no longer. It's been sold and changed hands and chopped up smaller pieces.
Do you have any interesting stories from your childhood that you would like to tell?
Childhood? Well, I told you I fell off that horse in 4th grade and broke my arm, but I got over it.
We all do.
Well, I grew up I say outside of town, but it was a country school at that time. So I went through the 3rd grade in a country school, 1-room schoolhouse, which are no longer. In 61, 62-ish, all the country schools consolidated and came to Durand. So I came to school in 4th grade in Durand. Finished here.
Career-wise, what was your first job?
Working for a farmer after school, weekends, summers.
How did you get into the railroad industry?
Oh, my family goes back a long, long ways. My great-grandfather was a boomer that came from the Dakotas I believe in either late teens or early 20s, which brought my grandmother here, and she lived her whole life here. She married my grandfather, of course, but he came from Ohio to work on the railroad. He had a couple brothers here in the area that they worked in the gravel business, but he hired on the railroad and he worked his whole career there. I believe that's the only job he ever had. He retired in the 60s. My dad worked for a while in the early 50s when I was born as a brakeman, but the business was slow then and they got laid off, and he went over to Simplicity, which is right around the corner there. And he stayed there, so he didn't go back to the railroad.
Is Simplicity another railroad hub?
No, it's just a business right here in town.
Early in your first workings with the railroad, what were your usual wages?
Wages? Well, I hired out in 73, January of 73. And, well, I worked a construction job for 6 months. It paid about $4 an hour, and the railroad paid $5, so I came over here. So my first wages were about $5 an hour. Luckily they got better, but that was pretty good back then for a kid.
I bet. Yeah. How long did you stay at your first railroad job?
About 9 months. Then I moved over to being a fireman, which was an apprentice engineer. And back then it took about 3 years worth of training, a little bit of class, but mostly hands-on training. So you progressed on a yearly basis. After the first year, you took a test and moved on to the second year, which qualified you to be a yard engineer. And when you finished the second year, then you went on the road jobs out of here. There used to be 12, 13 road jobs that went to outlying places out of here. So that was the third year part of it, that you got the road training, and when you passed that, you were good to go. So once you passed that, you were an engineer, and unless you smashed up too much stuff, you kept doing it.
Yeah. So you did road jobs all over the place? Or?
Back then, when they left here, you could go to Greenville was one destination. Turkey Trail, they called it, because it goes through the country so much. And there was a line that went straight west to Grand Haven. Another job that went to Muskegon. And another job went to Bay City, Midland area, which was pretty much out of here. And then there was another job out of Flint Flint was the hub of Durand at the time. Now it's the other way around. But back then Durand was the hub and Flint was an outstation for engineers. There was a job that left there and went south of Detroit. And then all the east-west either originated in Port Huron or Battle Creek. But I never worked down there until a couple of years before I retired. So I was always out of Durand or Flint.
How many years did you do this job?
40.
And you would just usually break roads down and repair them, or what would you do typically on road jobs?
I was the engineer or fireman.
Okay. Any stories or experiences while you're working on jobs? Anything big happen at one point during the 40 years?
Oh, just a lot of little things. Nothing big. Never any big crashes. I was pretty happy that when I retired I had never hurt nobody. Because many people were killed in the railroad by trains, and engineers had to live through smashing them and all.
Yeah.
That's not easy. There's times when 4 families were wiped out in a car train accident, you know, and the engineer had to see it because he hit them. Even though there's nothing you can do, it still is in the back of your mind forever, really. But fortunately, I hit a few, but I never hurt anybody, so.
Yeah. That's a good thing.
That was a good thing.
Have you had any other jobs other than road jobs?
Well, I worked out of Flint a lot in the yard there.
Yeah.
There was a lot of industry at the time. The car plants were huge, and they're still a part of Flint, but Flint has dried up to what it was.
Yeah.
It's back in the 70s when the car plants went to more of an on-time parts delivery. Trucks could bring it in a more timely fashion than the railroad could. Railroad moves a huge volume, but they can't get there very fast. So back when they used to haul a lot of parts, the parts were in box cars in a yard somewhere, or when they needed them, you moved them into the plant so they used the parts. Well, that took time.
Heavy lifting.
So the trucks changed things dramatically on the railroad.
Yeah.
Even we called them locals, but the jobs that went to Muskegon, Greenville, they worked all the little towns along the way, the elevators and what have you. So each town they'd stop and set a few cars off, pick a few up, and go from town to town, where now the railroad has changed such that you pick up a train in Port Huron and they'll stop in Durand, they might stop in Flint, they go right to Battle Creek, and that's all they do. And the majority of the train, they get to Battle Creek, they might sort out some of the cars for other destinations, but most of them go right on through to Chicago. So it's pretty much all big long haul talk trains now, where it used to be that plus the smaller lines, and now it's all the independent little Tuscola, Saginaw Bay, and it's changed so many times that they've picked up that short work slack that we used to do.
Yeah. And
wasn't as economical for the bigger outfits, so they either sold it or just abandoned it.
And now that we got computers.
Computers changed it drastically too.
Yeah.
When I hired out, everything was handwritten out on a card. If you switched cars, you had a card that told you where they went. You'd throw the switch and off she'd go. But now it's all computerized paperwork, and there's yards too that are mechanical. They throw the switches electronically, and it's changed quite a little.
Out of your years of work, what did you like best about working?
Well, when I first got started, you went in, did your work, and if you got done early, you went home. So you seldom put in an 8-hour day, but you still moved a lot of cars, and that changed. Now it's just hourly. So
I bet that includes your least favorite part too about working.
Oh yeah, a lot of work, a lot of hours, a lot of days, 7 days a week, on call for 20 years. Occasionally you had a regular job, but most of it was an extra board, which meant you were a list of people that when somebody took a day off, you took their spot. So you had to sit by the phone, you had a 2-hour call, and you had to be ready to go. So you were short of sleep a lot, and there was plenty of work There's always been plenty of work because the less employees they got, the more they like it. So they like to work the ones they got into the ground, and still do.
Yeah.
The only fortunate part about it is you could only work 12 hours, and you had to end it right there. It's a federal law; you couldn't work more than 12 hours. It might take you a little time to get back where you came from, or to where you were going to spend the night, because some jobs here in the Battle Creek would lay over down in Battle Creek and take another train out. So
Unionization had something to do with that, maybe? Or...
No, the union has been around for 150 years. So. No, that was a federal law for safety, not working too long. Because right when I hired out, I think 2 years before that, you could work 16 hours.
When was this?
Well, late 60s, right about, I'd say 1970-ish. You could work 16 hours, so they had 16 on, 8 off, because you had to have 8 hours rest. But part of that rest was getting to work and getting home, and so you sure didn't get no 8 hours back in those days. Luckily, it changed before I hired out, and it was 12. So. And it's still that way today.
Do you have any brothers or sisters in the family?
I got 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
What jobs?
One brother was a switchman for just about as long as I was. He had about 35 years in, 30, 35. He had a disability 4 or 5 years ago, so he'd be about ready to retire right now, but he was out 3 or 4 or 5 years earlier, just from the fatigue of working, switching cars, and aches and pains and bad knees, and it's a tough job.
Yeah.
Walking across them rocks for miles a day, it takes its toll on you. Another brother started on a section, but he got a job in airplane mechanic, so he didn't stay on the railroad. My last brother was never on the railroad. He's a building and grounds for Swartz Creek schools. My sister went to the UP to Sault Ste. Marie to school and stayed there. She was she started to work in a prison up there for a while, and she got out of that, went to social department in town, and then she ended up as a liquor inspector for several counties up there through the states. She worked for the state. The other couple are just housewives. So.
What part of life working on the railroads do you miss the most?
The people. When you work with somebody 12 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, you spend more time with them than you do with your own family. So, while the different jobs had different people and it changed a lot, so you got to know everyone, and you knew more about them than you did your own family sometimes, because you sit there for hours and you talk. So.
It's like a brotherhood, kind of.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's usually where it's where you get to know the people the most. You have your friends, but you don't spend that much time with them, or you do here.
Back then, what was the depot like back then? Because it's called.
Well, when I hired out, in that corner right over there. The gal that was the secretary worked there, so I met with her and signed a few papers and picked up a few books and started riding trains. But it was right when the depot was on its last leg for the railroad, and then it just sat here.